Okay. Hey, Howard, how are you?
Hi, Douglas. Great to be here.
Thank you for coming on the show. Nice to see you.
My pleasure.
Glad to have you here. Let's see, we're going to be talking about economics today, which I'm glad because I think people have a lot of questions. I think there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. Did you just see the CPI this morning?
I
Uh,
sure did.
8.3, which is pretty bad. One of the talking points on your bio, it says, can you give examples of important economic issues that are misunderstood? Is it misunderstood that the more money the government spends, the higher the inflation goes?
Yes. Very simply, for the government to spend an extra dollar, it either has to tax it away from someone or borrow it from someone. So every dollar, literally every dollar the government spends, is taken away from someone else. It's $1 less for someone else to spend. So to go back to inflation, what's inflation? It's too much money chasing too few goods. So by taking a dollar from either a buyer of a bond or an American paying taxes and taking it away from them and putting it in the government's pocket and spending it, it doesn't really change the amount of money chasing the amount of goods.
Okay, so this concept of the government is printing too much money and spending too much money is causing inflation. That is a myth.
I think there's a great misunderstanding there. This is not Weimar Germany, where the government can rev up the printing presses, grab the money as it's coming off, and spend it. The Fed controls the money supply, and it does not give money to the federal government or to any other party for that matter. So the government, again, when the government, Congress, and the president want to spend money, they either have to tax it away from someone or borrow it from someone. They can't simply call up the Fed and say, send some over.
Okay, so what is causing all the inflation that we're seeing recently?
At its most basic, inflation is too much money or spending chasing too few goods. There's a balance between the amount of money or spending on one hand and the amount of goods or stuff that our economy produces. If they're both growing at the same rate, prices will be stable. But when they get out of balance, when either the money grows faster than the amount of stuff or the amount of stuff starts shrinking, we get inflation. Prices get bid up. So right now, prices are getting bid up. Why? Two reasons. One, the amount of stuff. We've had a lot of trouble producing stuff because of the coronavirus pandemic, because of the war in Ukraine. There have been some climate issues that have limited the ability of the economy to produce the goods and services that people want to buy. On the other hand, the amount of spending has remained strong for a variety of reasons. Unemployment's very low. There was a lot of help to taxpayers during the pandemic. So the amount of spending compared to the amount of goods and services our economy is producing has gone up, causing price increases.
Okay, has that held true for gasoline and oil as well?
Yes, we've all seen the price of gas soar. It's coming down a bit. The most interesting thing about that is gasoline is priced on an international level. People complain about gas prices in America, and some people fault the government in Washington. But the irony is that the U.S. has among the lowest gas prices of any developed nation.
Well, it's true. I mean, I know in Europe they're paying eight, nine, $10 a gallon in some places. I think Norway is up to $10 a gallon. It's
Exactly right. And
yeah,
here in New York, it's already under $4 a gallon.
it's frustrating when it goes from two to four in a short amount of time. I think people
Yes,
get a little bit panicky.
absolutely. But fortunately, I just read literally an hour ago that for the last 90 days, each day, the average price of gasoline has gone down in the United States.
Do you think this is just a balance out from the COVID, that where people weren't traveling, they were restricted, and now everybody's traveling, so the demand has gone up? Is that what caused the spike back in May, June?
Yeah, it's a combination of the demand. People have money. Their unemployment is very low. There was a lot of assistance to people during the pandemic. And on the other hand, there are supply chain issues. As I mentioned, the war in Ukraine, the coronavirus pandemic, climate issues. So there's that imbalance. And now what's happening now? The Fed is trying to correct that balance. It's trying to slow spending. And how does it do that? It raises interest rates. Rising interest rates discourage people from borrowing and discourage people from spending. So that's what they're trying to do now. And my expectation, notwithstanding what we heard this morning about inflation, is it'll start coming down pretty soon. Actually, it's down from last month. Last month was 8.5%. This month is 8.3%. I think what you see in the markets today is disappointment that it didn't come down even faster.
Well, the market, the last time I checked this morning, it was down over 1,000 points on the Dow Jones.
It's one of the worst days in stock market history. And again, because people were disappointed, they thought inflation would be coming down even faster. But there's an important bottom line point here. It is coming down. It was 8.5% last month, and this month, for August rather, it's 8.3%. Not as fast as anyone would like to see, certainly not as fast as the Fed would like to see, but it's heading in the right direction.
Are they going to have to continuously raise the interest rates to back to 1970s level to get this thing under control?
I remember as a kid, interest rates were around 18%, and I don't think anyone expects anything near that. I think the next increase in interest rates will probably be another 0.75%. And at some point, it's going to start coming down. Their foot is on the brake, and at some point, it's going to start slowing economic activity. Again, we see the inflation rate beginning to come down. So I'm optimistic.
Well, you know what? The one thing that people forget, and I grew up in the 70s, is that in the 70s, you could go to the bank with $10, open up a passbook savings account, and get 5.25% interest on your money.
Mm-hmm.
That hasn't happened in decades because the interest rates have been so low. Can we get back there? I mean, I wouldn't mind paying 10 or 12% interest on a mortgage if I could get 5.25% on my savings.
I don't think that's going to happen. And why don't I think that? Because there's a lot of savings out there. Everything comes down to supply and demand. There's a lot of money looking for a place to go out there. A big theme in understandable economics is economic inequality. People who have done well recently have done very well. So there's a lot of cash out there looking for a place to be invested. And so interest rates are unlikely to go very high because there's such demand for bonds, there's such demand for investments that the people who issue these securities can get away with paying relatively low returns on them.
We're in a climate right now where the rich are getting richer, excessively so than it was. Yeah.
Yes, that's a big theme in the book. I call it the winner-take-all economy.
Your book is called Understandable Economics. And give me an idea of an overview of the book.
Well, the book tries to explain the whole macroeconomy without jargon, without graphs, without formulas. It's supposed to read like narrative nonfiction. So it talks about the economy, some of the most important questions in the economy, who gets what and who does what. And then it gets into the specifics of what exactly the Fed does, how it creates money. It's very interesting. I saw the survey of economics students a few months ago, and the majority of them couldn't explain how central banks get additional money into the economy. So it explains that process. It talks about our tax system. It talks about recessions and booms and what the government does in connection with the fluctuating economy. So there's a lot covered. It's supposed to give an overview of the macroeconomy, and I hope people read it and are spurred onto further reading on the subject. But it's supposed to be an introduction for people who are curious and would like to know more.
Okay, so it's a basic kind of economics for people that don't know anything about economics. Could read the
Yes,
book.
but it's supposed to introduce it in a different way than most courses on economics introduce it. Again, I don't have formulas and graphs and jargon. Economics is not physics or biology. It's not like there's a right answer or a wrong answer, or there's a bunch of things you need to know in order to understand something. Economics is a social science. It's something. It's conclusions reached by looking at the world. So the goal of the book is to help people look at the world and reach informed conclusions regarding what's happening.
That might be a misunderstanding with people, because I think a lot of people think that economics is simply mathematics, and it's not.
That's very sad. I had a student once who I asked whether she had taken a macroeconomics course, and she said, yes, it's all formulas. That's like a psychiatrist saying that their job is all formulas and math. There is a reason why. I'll give you an example. What is the word for a psychiatrist uses for a person who goes into a deep funk or gloom, can't really function, and and I almost said the word, and is not really functional anymore? It's called a depression. Well, there's a reason why a severe economic downturn has the same word. It's a psychological phenomenon. You can test the skills of workers before a recession or a depression and the skills of workers after. They haven't changed. You could test how many whatevers a factory could turn out before a recession and how many of them they could turn out after a recession. It hasn't changed. What's changed? Their outlook. People get a gloomy mindset. They stop spending. What happens when they stop spending? Businesses their profit drops. They start laying off workers. Workers who are getting laid off spend less, and the economy goes into a downward spiral. It starts as an economic phenomenon. Obviously, as people are getting laid off, factories start shutting down, and it has real world consequences. But it starts as a psychological phenomenon.
Well, the market crash of 1929 set off what everybody calls a panic. Now, a panic has nothing to do with mathematics. That's simply people scared that they're going to lose everything, right?
And it's the same phenomenon when we have even mild recessions. People don't panic, but they get gloomy. They spend less, businesses earn less, they don't pay as much, or they lay off workers. That in turn creates another cycle of reduced spending. The next cycle of reduced spending causes even more layoffs. And as I describe in Understandable Economics, what has to happen is the government has to intervene to break that cycle.
We've got just a couple of minutes left. Let me get one more of your talking points. Did you write these talking points? They're really good.
I'm not sure what you have in front of you, but I definitely wrote talking points for the book.
See, they're all so good, I can't decide which one I want to take. All right, last question, and then we got to wind this down. Is our national debt a threat? Because we hear that the thing is growing, and there's some kind of a counter in Times Square, isn't there? That just is.
Yes, it shows the total national debt, which is in the tens of trillions. When I taught economics, I didn't write a trillion, the word. I put the number with all the zeros following it. It's very impressive.
So is it a threat to our national security?
Well, I don't know about you, but I cannot get my head around the concept of tens of trillions of dollars. The number is simply too big. In fact, the difference between trillion and billion, it's very hard to get my head around. And the example I use in Understandable Economics is a congressman mixing up trillions and billions and not admitting that he didn't know about whether one particular item of spending was in the trillions or billions. And I said that's like mixing up whether you spent $10,000 on your sandwich for lunch or $10 on your sandwich for lunch. You have to bring it down to the human level. And so what I do in the book is I figure out what that debt is per American. And each American pays $1,000 a year for interest on the national debt. That's an average. Some people pay a lot more, some people pay a lot less. So the question is $1,000 a year per American in interest payments an existential crisis, a bankruptcy-inducing crisis, a nation-ending crisis? And you could have your opinion on that, but you should understand that that's what it is. Tens of trillions of dollars sounds horrible, but when you talk about it as $1,000 per person, you could begin to have a meaningful and insightful conversation about whether our debt is too much.
Well, doesn't it depend largely on who holds the debt? I mean, if China holds a significant portion of our debt, they would own us in a sense.
Yeah, and the vast majority of debt is owned by other Americans. So what is happening with our debt? We're taking money from taxpayers, American taxpayers, and mostly shifting it to other Americans. It's just shifting money around. About a third of our debt is held by foreigners. More is held by Japanese and Chinese. More is held by the Europeans and the Chinese. China does hold, and I don't remember the number off the top of my head, it's in the single-digit % of our debt. And so, yes, close to $100, let's say, assuming they own 10% of our debt, goes to China per American. That may not be the best thing in the world, but I would argue that, one, they help finance our spending. That didn't arise out of the ground. It was something that that was an arrangement we voluntarily entered into. And secondly, they now have an interest in our economy. By holding all that debt, China has an interest. They want to see our economy thrive, or else they would have a concern about getting repaid their debt. At the very least, they have an interest in America's survival. So that's a relatively small amount of money to part with for the service that's provided, namely funding our deficits and having an interest in our economy.
Well, I think on that we're going to have to wind this down. We are out of time. Thank you so much for coming on. My guest is Howard Yaruss. The book is called Understandable Economics. The book is out now?
Yes, it's coming out on 2 days.
Okay. Do you have a website you want to give out?
Yeah, it's howardyaruss.com, HOWARDYARUSS.com. And I'd love to hear from your listeners.
Okay. And there's links to where people can buy the book and all that on
Absolutely. Yep, it's all there.
All right, great. Howard, thanks so much for coming on this show. Best of luck with your book.
Thank you, Douglas. It was great. Thank you.